We are live.
Okay, thank you very much, Adnan.
Thank you, Adnan.
Let me switch here. It's off.
Okay.
Hello and welcome everybody watching us today. We have unusual time today for our session as we have a guest from Australia, so we have to accommodate some, let me say, time difference between here and Australia, where currently it's 8 o'clock over there, and we have 11 o'clock here in Europe. So our session is streamed live, of course, on Facebook. Adnan made it possible. Thank you for that. And today we have a special guest, and a researcher, an academic researcher, actually very well known among the Assyrian community, and speaking, of course, and translating, writing in Turkish and English and Greek languages. I would like to welcome my dear friend Racho Donef. Welcome.
Thank you, Abdulmesih. Thank you for extending an invitation. Yes, the time difference is a bit difficult, and I think there's more of a problem for you because you had to change the time.
Yeah, no problem. Our session is anyhow recorded and later on placed on YouTube so that our regular viewers, which are mostly, of course, not English speaking, they will have the opportunity to watch the session. And I think it's important today that we will go through a couple books that have been recently published by Nsibin Publishing. There are 4 books. There are, of course, much more published by Nsibin Publishing, but today we will talk about 2 series. The first series is called Osmanlı'da ve Cumhuriyet'te asker ve sivil bürokratların kaleme aldığı Asır ve Ermeni raporları. And the second series, each of them consisting of 2 volumes. Seyfo'ya giden yollar, Mesopotamya'da Doğu Batı Süryanik kiliseleri arasında tarihi, politik, dini etkenlerin ürettiği iç savaş. But prior we go to that, allow me, I would like to go to introduce our speaker, of course, of today. Dr. Racho Donef has completed 2 doctorates in anthropology and politics, I believe from the University of Sydney.
Macquarie.
As well as, sorry?
Macquarie University.
Oh, okay. As well as a number of other degrees inter alia in languages, social sciences, and ancient history. Dr. Donef is specialized on Turkish political affairs, the role of religion and minorities, as well as minorities in the Middle East. And over the last 25 years, Dr. Donef has taught a number of courses related to Turkey and the Middle East in Workers' Education Association. And he has published a huge number of papers and dozen of books, primarily concerning the Assyrian. His publication list that I have received includes more than 65 entries. As said, many academic research papers published in conferences, book chapters, and a couple books, of course, also from him. And the most well-known book from him on Assyrian is the Hakkari Massacres, an anthology of documents related to massacres and deportation of Assyrian in northern Mesopotamia, which was published in 2014. Also in 2012, he published another important book, Assyrians Post-Nineveh, Conflict, Identity, Fragmentation, and Survival, a study of Assyrio-Genius communities. It was published by Tatavla Publishing in Sydney. Both books actually were published over there. He has also translated a couple books. So he is I would say mainly focused on Assyrian issues also, and we are of course grateful for his research on this topic. I hope I have covered a little bit your biography.
Thank you. There's not much more to say. Thank you, Abdulmesih. There was a gap in my publication of Assyrians for 3 years because my second PhD was at a more advanced age, and it was on Turkish religion and politics, nothing to do with minorities, but it had to do more about the last 100 years of the Turkish Republic and the politics of secularism versus religion. So in those 3 years, I have concentrated on the Turkish element, which in earlier years I had concentrated on ethnic minorities.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a gap, and now I came back, and basically I'm helping John Bet-Sawoce, who is our friend, and who's got amazing energy and amazing connections to find documents where we didn't think they existed. So when I started about SIFO, I started with Gabriel Yonan's book.
Yes.
And I didn't even know that book existed. I was giving a radio interview here, and I said, they asked me a question about Assyrian genocide, and I said, look, I did something on Armenian genocide. I witnessed, I did interview some eyewitnesses. This was in 90s. But I said, I didn't come across. And they said, well, read Gabriel Yonan's book. And I started from there. And in that period, there wasn't that much more. And through efforts of quite a few Assyrians, including yourself, and now there's a great body of literature, and we're not really just relying on diplomatic sources. Since then, church reports came, and now, thankfully, with the great translation or transliteration by Abdulmesih Mutaf, access to a lot of Ottoman records.
That's true. Actually, we have to mention that you, along with Jan Bet-Sawoce, had also supported David Gaunt, of course, when he published his
Yes.
first book.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
book, at least is my understanding, it was a key to break through an international arena for SIFO. Yeah.
Yes, and I think since Gabriel's book on the Forgotten Genocide, there was a milestone at the next stage.
Yes.
To show, the book showed that the source of the records are so varied that we don't rely anymore on the books that Armenian genocide scholars relied when they had to discuss Armenian genocide and prove to the world Armenian genocide, the Blue Book and so forth.
Yeah.
There's so much more material. And of course, they're also collecting more material now. As the time progresses, we're getting a lot more material. And I'm pretty sure John has a lot more
That's true.
in the pipeline.
That's true.
So, yes, so there's so much. And now this is in Turkish, as of course you can surmise from the title, and which is okay because it does open up to an audience that speaks Turkish, but hopefully some of them we can translate to English in the future.
Of course. So let's start with those two books. Allow me to make a short introduction into the book. Of course, into both books, you and I had the privilege, of course, to write a short foreword into the book. So that make us, of course, familiar with the content of the whole book. And that was the idea that we talk about and make it known maybe to a larger audience, even though it's, as you say, it's written in Turkish, but our forewords, at least the summaries that we have captured, are written in English. So the first volume, there are two, of course, the two volumes, they contain really dozens of reports and numerous documents from the Turkish state archives, most of which have not yet been published in modern Turkish. So they belong to the class known Doğu Raporları, Eastern Report, and they have been transcribed from Ottoman Turkish and translated into or adapted into modern day Turkish. The texts have also been annotated, of course, by the editor Can Bet-Sawoce for better understanding. As indicated or noted in the editor's foreword, the reports published belong to a category called Laiha. Maybe you can a little bit elaborate on this category. What was it, the Laiha?
As Abdulmesih Mutaf explains, it's a document belonging to the state archives. They're basically reports produced by officials, either from the military or the civil bureaucracy. They're reports.
Okay.
But they have a special name. They're privileged reports, and they're in the state archives. And I think if you look at the preface in English, Abdulmesih gives very good description of it. But even if you don't remember what the term means, it's actually what the title of the book says. They are reports written by civil as well as military bureaucrats or officers.
Yes, that's true. So in the first study, so in the first book, basically the editors have compiled, if I am correct, 13 selected laikas that deal with issues related to non-Muslim ethnic groups, which is the focus, of course, of the editors, mainly Assyrians and Armenians, and describe social economic conditions and talk about public security. They also contained important information on the relationship of these communities to other groups in the geography, example to the Kurds in the region in southeastern Anatolia, both during the Ottoman Empire and the Republic. So the 13 reports cover not only Ottoman time, but extend into the Turkish Republic time. So as I have seen, or we have seen in case of the Assyrians as ethno-religious people, different denominational designations, of course, such Nestorian, Chaldean, and Jacobites are used in this report. And I think it's also important to note that these reports, often written right after historical events, that was at least my sense in the eastern and southeastern region, they contain numerous authentic statements by official local actors, and they are substantiated also by relevant government communication, and that makes them, I think, very, very valuable. So I see them some authentic. Maybe there are even some positive statements from Ottoman administration and authorities, which you usually don't read in other documents. Would you agree with that?
Yes. First of all, yes, they are primary source material, which it'll be wealth of information for many researchers. Second of all, yes, I have noticed that surprisingly, you might say, is that quite a few Ottoman officials, they do talk about injustices, especially in relation to so-called Nestorians. Because there's been conflict between Nestorians and Kurds. Sorry? Yes. Of course, the term Nestorians is not very satisfactory today, but for people who, I know they dislike the term Nestorian, is not applicable anymore. But historically, these documents, as you pointed out, would talk about Nestorians, Chaldeans, and Jacobites, and often they'll say Syriani, which we always have problems translating into English. If you translate as Assyrian, confuses someone from being a citizen of the state of Syria. Sometimes it's translated as Syriac, but that's a language. So no matter what you do, unless you put footnotes, to explain to the reader. The nomenclature is complicated, and so you have to bear that in mind when you read the reports. I always in an article try to say, these terms are not current, but they were, and the officers use those terms because, as you know, it's a religious-based society. The millets were according to religion, not language or nationality. So although the report talks about, the collection title is Armenian and Assyrians, of course, the Kurds are mentioned extensively in both reports. Unfortunately, those mentions are in relation to conflict between Kurds and Assyrians.
That's true. That's true. So before we go, of course, into the detail, let me finish here the overview. As we have seen, in addition, of course, most of this report include a number of appendices, such as documents, formally encrypted communication, and other related reports, which the editor added, of course, to the reports. And as said, the events cover time-wise and from 19th century to 1920 they go, so about 150 years. And also geographically, so beyond the time, also geographically, they cover a huge region or different regions like Siirt, Van, Diyarbakir, Hakkari, Mosul, and Turabdin. And this is all treated in this report. So this makes them really very, very important in this context. So then we can go into the detail. Let me start with one first report, a dedicated report by Marshal Khalil Kamil Pasha labeled Nesturi Raporu, as well as several documents concerning the attacks and massacre that the Kurdish tribes under the leadership of Badr Khan Bey carried out against Assyrian Nestorian population in 1843 and 46, in which thousands of Assyrians were slaughtered, their property plundered, and so on. And we have authentic statements, of course, here from Ottoman archives on this incident. Would you like to comment on it, or should I continue?
If you know, you can continue, but
okay.
Yes, this is one of those reports that.
In a letter that Badr Khan Bey, the Emir of Botan, sent to Governor of Mosul, it says that they sent about 10,000 armed soldiers against the Nestorian community in the Kurdish mountains, and they allied with the Kurdish group called Ertushi, Ismail Pasha, Tataraga, and the Emir of Hakkari supporting these soldiers. The soldiers, of course, to attack the Nestorian Assyrians. Finally, the said soldier raided a place called Kabis, and went around the plain to the mountainside where they burned and looted many villages. They also committed many atrocities against the people by burning down the churches with goods, books, similar items were collected, and especially in a place called Sundus Beydu. It's even reported that hundreds of them are sent to captured people, sent to Jizre to be sold as prisoners. So they killed the mother of the patriarch, Marshamun, in a place called Kabis, cut her body into two pieces, and before they told her, we will do the same to your son. And they threw her into the water of Zap. This is what the report says. One of the reports,
yes. One thing that need to point out that Badr Khan Bey, as you know, in the documents appear his title being Miralai Badr Khan Bey. So he was rewarded by the prior to this, I must say, as giving the title of colonel and the report mentions that, of course. But despite that, we get a lot of details from an Ottoman document about the massacres occurred from one ethnic group to another, which is, although this is in Turkish, I mean, it's in the Ottoman Turkish, which transliterated. Surprising thing is that in Turkey, you don't find this sort of reports widely distributed.
That's true. That's true.
Because it goes against a narrative, even though it was 1843-44, not 1915. But yes, so it's important to point out, yes, it was Kurds versus Nestorians, Assyrians, but the Bedirhan Bey was deemed to be worthy of the title of colonel by the Ottoman administration.
In fact, it was in March 39 that he was appointed colonel of a reserve military unit set up by the Diyarbakir province on the government orders. In addition, by ministerial order, a sword was made for him along with a glorious medal, which were to be presented.
Yes, that's actually, yes, that's in the report. Yes, your memory is so much better than mine. Yes, so anyway, I mean, as I said, it's in Turkish, and probably some people may not be able to read or understand it, but it's a good start to the collection. And it starts from an issue. I mean, the Assyrians know about Bedirhan Bey and the conflict between the different tribes, because it's not really just ethnic or religious group fighting here. It's also different tribes fighting, and I think in the second collection talks about different tribes actually forming alliances across religion. So it's a lot more complicated topic.
Let me go into a second report, which was by the deputy. Which was written by the deputy Fazl from 1895, also entitled Nasturi Raporu. The deputy begins his report, of course, with a modest and factual statement that he considered appropriate. He is saying that to present to the ruler of the state some of the situation I know in Kurdistan in a way that corresponds to my loyalty, with the thought that this would lead to issues being put on the agenda and investigated. The first thing to be considered here is the fact that there has not been good bonds between our great government and the people governed there. So he's basically saying there is no control, there is really no relationship established. This is what it means. And he begins his report actually on the Christians with a statement, Kurdistan gavurları şanssız adamlardır. Kurdistan infidels are unlucky people. That's how he starts. He describes the archaic social structure of the communities in the eastern region in very, very detail. And so he's basically talking about the ownership, how Muslim rulers, Kurdish rulers, owned Christians. They were basically bought by them. They could be sold. They were like slaves. And
they were exactly slaves. That's the definition of slavery. And the second collection as well has got some reports, and I made some notes on that one. That in fact it describes what we talk about slavery. When we talk about slavery, usually we just the United States and the British taking slaves from Africa comes to mind, but slavery has been around for from ancient Greece, from ancient Egypt, from ancient Rome, or whatever. But in more modern times, we can see that within the Ottoman Empire, which it's the dying stages, but still the Ottoman Empire, the Christians, which were indigenous to the mountains, are actual slaves. Well, we're actually slaves, and we're not saying that. The officer says it. And of course, he used the term Kurdistan'ın gavurları, which, of course, as I'm listening to it, it's offensive to me. But in the context of the time, when he says Gavur, for him was just a description of people not being Muslims. I don't mean he meant it in an offensive or derogatory way. It's just that the context changed. And he calls them unlucky. And in fact, it's very interesting that an Ottoman officer is informing the Sublime Porte about mistreatment of his citizens. And the other thing is going on here, of course, is that, as you know, Nestorians in the 19th century, there are some missionaries, they call them the independent country of Nestorians. Up in the Hakkari mountain, they were quite disconnected from the administration of the Ottoman Empire. So, but this independence, of course, came with a price. They had to have continuous conflicts with the Kurds around them. And I think this report talks about this connection between the Sublime Porte and its citizens or subjects.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, recently I came across a German, very old German report from 1942, if I am correct, with the title Nestorian Republic. And it catched my attention. So I shared it with John, and he translated it even, I think, into Turkish. As you say, there was some independence. So from outside, they were really seen as absolutely independent people.
What was the year of the report? The date.
The title in German. It was a German report from 1842.
1842. Okay.
Yeah, we can share it with you later.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting find. Yes.
Yeah, but the title catch my attention. So that's where we had the discussion about it. It says Nestorian Republic. Yeah.
Yes, we never had this this terminology. I had the independent country of Nestorians. I think one of the missionaries put it as, and I used that phrase before a couple of times. Yeah. But republic, I mean, of course, wasn't a republic.
Yeah, of course not. Of course not.
The republic requires a president and a parliament and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know? That was lacking. I think the author used the term republic equivalent to country, I think.
Yeah, but let's go back to our report. As we said,
yes.
This guy he says that according to some religious authorities, Christians are not dhimmis whose lives and property are guaranteed by the state. Therefore, their property and lives can be lawfully taken, and that is, their blood can be shed. This is exactly what he is writing. So that means that there are the Shafis, Shafites. This was a religious group at that time, and they had this very extreme view on the Christians. And the report goes on explaining that those who have been bought with money by an aga or a bey are exempt from this. So they were basically secured. The Christian villages are mostly the property of a Kurdish aga or a bey, in this case. And he goes on that he had always aga always reserves the right to sell his own unbelievers. It was obviously common for a Christian family to be sold at 5,000 to 10,000 piastre kurush at that time.
Yes, as modern day slavery, if we call that period modern, well, it is because it's 19th century. Yes, it was modern day slavery, and that article goes, that report goes beyond about discussion issue of SIFO or
Yeah.
generally oppression and the situation of our Nestorians, but the fact that state-sanctioned slavery existed is the issue. Yeah, as I think this is one maybe that we should translate it to English.
Okay. So interestingly, the first volume includes also two reports drawn up by Armenians, as you have seen. The first one
Yes.
was by Kikor Algian, the deputy delegate of Armenian community of One. And I guess the second one was from Kirko Zohrab Effendi, who was one of the Armenian intellectuals, of course, a parliament member. And it was then in 1950, he was also arrested and abducted and later killed. Yeah, there are two reports from them in the report in the first volume.
There's also a number of other reports. Mehmet Mansur Effendi,
okay,
talking about the Armenian problem, and of course in this publication, Abdulmesih Mutaf, this professor, he did the introduction. I just translated it. I didn't do a full work, but I went through his introduction, and then I made some comments on the site, because there's a lot of documents. I'm amazed how you remember all these documents, Abdulmesih. You've got a great memory. But the Mansur Effendi's report talks about bandits, which is the sort of Ottoman language for anyone who strays from the from the dhimmi attitude. So, and that sort of language we find in a lot of documents, brigands, cheteciler, and that sort of language. And it's also, I made a note of the term which I used earlier, Kurdistan gavurları, but I explained the context a little bit. There is also a report on the political importance of Nestorians, 1895. And as you mentioned, Kikor Alcian's report in 1888, and also, but there was a couple of Armenians who in the reports are shown to be influenced by external forces, which is another theme in the official historiography. It's always external forces, either the Russians or the British. It's never the fault of the empire that is governing. And so these are the things that I took from those documents. And also, of course, the time period is so varied that we talk about different time periods, like 43, and then we jump to 94, 95. Of course, 94, 95, there were massacres occurring in Diyarbakir. And then there's also media telegraph, the telegrams of media, 1909, and the closure of churches in 1909. So we normally talk about this SIFO 1915. I always point out, well, yes, but 1894, 1895, there have been massacres and there are records. And I translated those to English in my latest paper, which is not published yet. So at least available in English. And 1909 massacres of Adana were quite extensive. And it wasn't just Armenians, of course. It was also Assyrians were also killed in that period. So this collection goes up to 1924, and as you mentioned at the beginning of this is an issue that is very important to me because it talks about 1924 Hakkari massacres. And this is why I produced that anthology
Yes.
to show that
Yes.
15 was nowhere near the end of atrocities. And it went up to 1924. The Nestorians or Assyrians left, they were deported in 1915, came back, but in 1924-26, they had to face, this time, the Republic's army and not the Ottoman army. Although it was still the remnants of the Ittihad, which were governing in the early years of the Republic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the documents are so varied. The ones that you focused are probably the most important one, but it depends on what the researcher is interested in. So there are so many themes that I think different researchers may focus on different subjects. My interests are different than yours, obviously, Abdulmesih, but and I think there's so much material there for so many researchers to just take them and use them as they want.
Yeah, let me pick up some let me say content from the second volume.
Yes.
There is a first report from the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivi, dates from December 1848, and the text or letter, it was apparently addressed to Judicial Council of Justice, Adalet Yargı Meclisi, to the Başbakanlık, and I found it positive, actually, that the report complains due to the failure to establish the Tanzimat system in Jizre, torture and oppression against the Nestorian community occurs. The governor of Jizre district, Mustafa Pasha, is acting against the rule. And
Yes.
as you know, of course, Sultan Abdulmejid had issued the Hatti Sharif reform edict from November 1839, marking the beginning of the Ottoman reform of the Tanzimat. Among other aspects, the decree aimed to give the non-Muslim of the empire a legal status equal to that of the Muslim. So the report in that context says non-Muslim are still employed free of charge, and they are used free of charge for work such as transportation and wood and straw. And interestingly, following the complaint, the governor of Jizre, Mustafa Pasha, was apparently removed from office, and an investigation against was launched. I found it really positive to discover such, let me say, documents in an archive. And obviously, there are much more of those, yeah.
I'm sure there are more. And in fact, I actually noticed on page 53, and I made a post-it note, slavery. This is what I said earlier. This is actually talks about slavery. And we're not saying that. He talks about free labor, which is slavery, and being sold and being the Christian of a certain agha is just being slavery. But that is produced by an Ottoman officer.
Yeah.
And that's more important perhaps than a missionary saying it, because then it will be dismissed as saying being biased. Okay,
that's true.
But this is written by the Ottoman Empire. Now the Tanzimat was well-meaning, of course. It meant to move into from sort of millet system, which is religious-based, to a citizenship model, like perhaps the European states of the time. Rather than being millets, they're equal citizens. So it's well-meaning, but unfortunately, in a vast empire, the local administration is disjointed from the supply and port. So locally, many things that are happening are against sultans, perhaps Abdulmejid at least, desire. But it's good to find that there were courageous officers who reduced this to writing, and thankfully we do have it.
That's true.
After all this time. But it's interesting that it was already, it's now in the public domain. Why wasn't it in the public domain 50 years ago, 40 years ago?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And there is another report actually also dated now 1861 and warning an official document warned that courts want to attack the Nestorian Assyrians, that the High Porte must therefore take all, I quote, necessary measures to prevent the Nestorian Christians who have won the support and love of England and are the loyal subjects of the Sultan from being exposed to great difficulties again. So there is a warning again from
Yes, and it talks
Turkish,
about torture, işkence, and oppression, zulüm. And that's an official Ottoman document.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think some readers may be surprised, and we're also surprised to a certain extent that there were honest rapporteurs in the period where
absolutely.
they reduced to writing what they thought to be true. Now, other researchers can perhaps challenge it, finding other documents, but it's hard to say that these documents are not objective. So one thing that we know, irrespective of these records, is that the Ottomans had a great bureaucratic tradition, so they have written everything down. So we shouldn't be surprised that these reports exist. What we're surprised is that why didn't we have them earlier, like 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago? Maybe because there's so many documents, and I think what Abdulmesih Mutaf did here made it easier for us. It's not just the transliteration, because one thing is that not that many people will be able to read the Ottoman document. Okay, so then it comes down to who is interested in extracting these documents. But the professor also simplified the language. Sadeleştirme is what he calls it. Because we're talking about 19th century Ottoman. Now, you are a Turkish speaker, and you'll understand Turkish as is spoken today, and the same for me. But 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it's a different register. So without the simplification, it would have been a lot harder to understand this context. And this is another problem. Unfortunately, not many people are able to read Ottoman script. And even if they can read the script, the meanings have changed. So it's very specialized work.
Interestingly, there is a document which I used as a research basic for a recent conference paper, and I am finalizing the paper for printing. It's a request formulated in an extended document labeled as deed, signed personally by Marshamun, the Patriarch, and dated August 2, 1869, under the General Deed of Regulations and Improvement for our 5 districts. So, beş nahiyemizde yönelik düzenlenme ve iyileştirme genel senedi. It describes in detail the necessary integration of the Nestorian mountain region, 5 districts of it, which laid within the borders of Çelemerik district, into the structure of the local Ottoman administration. And they say, with reference, I am quoting, that they, as well as the surrounding tribes and nomads, have so far demonstrated a very good order towards the state and have continued this behavior in some critical cases. For this reason, and thanks to His Majesty the Sultan, we wish from now on to share, like other nationalities, in all rights and duties that occur to us. So in particular, and in order to benefit from and share positive effects of civilization, such as education and training, trade and industry, the sub-district should also be included in the general local government system. as required by laws and regulation. And so subsequently, there are a number of demands formulated, very, very interesting document, multiple pages. As said, it's in itself worth really to research. And that's what I have tried initially.
Yes, and also in this collection, also I think at some point, I think it's page 89, talks about allies between the Irtushi clan and Assyrians, which is what I mentioned in the first for the first report, that sometimes we had alliances which went tribal alliances that went across the millets, across religious lines, which makes for us hard to understand the context. Of course, because the Nestorians were so-called were independent, it makes sense that the Ottoman Empire would like to incorporate them and make them and a part of it. I mean, they were part of it nominally, but as you know, they were called the independent tribes, Ashiret Nasturileri, as opposed to the Nestorians in the plains, which were then they were subjects, whereas the ones in Hakkari were not treated as subject of the empire. So this document, of course, is interesting. What's more interesting is what you're going to show next. Sabunjuzade, Luis Alberi, or Sabunji. I'll let you introduce him. And in my foreword in this, if I'm not mistaken, I did translate part of his report to Abdulhamid.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so you go. Introduced
to
the readers our esteemed Sabunjuzade.
He was, of course, a translator, and he summarized article about the Islamic world selected from political press in Europe. Occasionally, he met and discussed with Sultan Abdulhamid European politics, history, and so on. His role was a kind of a press consultant. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's I don't remember the Ottoman title, but he worked in a special office and he had access to the Sultan. So he was high up in the hierarchy. And for people shouldn't be surprised that there were Christians in the Ottoman hierarchy because of their knowledge of different languages, which was frowned upon in the Ottoman Empire until much later in the Ottoman Empire. All the translation and interpreting jobs, translation is in writing, interpreting is oral, were done by Christians. Of course, the Milleti Sadeka sort of slowly lost their status as the trusted millet. The Greeks became independent, so they had their own country declared. So the Greeks were removed. There were lots of Greeks working in the Ottoman Empire in high positions. So then you got in this later period, you also have some Assyrians working in this. Although other than him, I don't know anyone working in the Ottoman palace. But was he Maronite? Was he a Syriac-catholic? I'm a bit. The Turkish book, which talks about Sabuncuzade's biography, calls him Maronite. But my friend John says he was Syriac-catholic. Of course, he studied in Beirut, but I'm not certain, of which church he was. Either way, he was doing great service to Abdulhamid and great disservice to his co-religionists. Let me put it politely.
Okay, we in the book, the editor added also numerous short news reports about the massacres in Kilikia, Adana, and surrounding. Yeah, in 1993, you pointed initially to that. So
Yes,
more than
1909.
100
Yeah, yeah.
news clips are transcribed from Taqwimi Vekai. This is the calendar of event which was published as an official newspaper of the Ottoman government. And
Yeah.
it's worth, of course, to go through those reports in detail, news reports, and summarize them. But we don't have the time, so maybe we should come back. Let me say here to um, there is on Hazakh on Idil also a report you may have seen in the second volume.
Yes.
Um,
The but the Adana issue in itself is
Sorry?
the Adana 1909 in
Adana, yeah.
itself is a topic. Is a
Yes, yes.
topic which I mean, you can probably give a talk, or some researchers can. And there's a report by a deputy, Hagop Babikyan,
Mhm.
but he says 21,000 Armenians and other Christians killed. Now, most of these other Christians are, of course, of the Assyrian background, of Suryani, Kildani,
Mm.
or Nestorians. Um, so that's and I think, of course, this is Abdul Hamid's doing, and I think that I think there's a report there by musician Gabriel Assad on page 168. He was an eyewitness, and he says it's Abdul Hamid's doing. And so, yes, these 4 books contain so many reports, and they contain so many different themes that we find it maybe difficult to go through and give justice to them
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
per
No, we
sitting.
will
Yes,
go to the second pair of the volumes differently. But in related to Adana, the numbers that I could research were about 1,200 people among Assyrio-Chaldeans were victim in Adana as well. Yeah.
yes. And there's a telegraph which I translated. They're complaining to the port.
Mm.
6 clerics. I think you can find that on atur.com. This is 15 years ago, I think I translated that. At least I had the courage to tell them, look what you're doing.
Mhm.
Although we'll see maybe when we have time to discuss later. There's a wedge between Armenians and Assyrians, especially Syriani clerics,
Mhm.
blaming the Armenians for what happened. So that in some documents in the second collection. But yes, and again, in this collection, there's the Republican period. There's the issue of 1924 again, the so-called Nasturi Isyana, the Nestorian
Yes.
rebellion, um, and even similar, which is not something I know much about, goes to 1933. But our friend John entitled that document, "The Path Towards Similar Massacres is Paved in Ankara."
Yeah.
The documents don't say that, but that's his take. Well, as an editor, um, that's his take. So, in a sense, he's showing that the similar, or at least arguing the similar massacres are also a continuation of sort of the same mentality.
Yeah. To maybe conclude the first two, one with mentioning of two thematic sets reports focused specifically on the events in Turabdin. The first set deals with the so-called weapon collection campaign in Azakh and in Midyat district in 1927. So, following the collection of weapons in the village, dozens of Assyrian men were arrested and deported to Elazığ. They were later released to counter the official narrative in the documents. The editor included an eyewitness account published by Hanna Murat Hanouche about the operation carried out in Azakh. And I think the report from Murat Hanouche was an interview that the editor Jan did with him. So, of course, Hazakh was a special location during the genocide where Assyrians were able to entrench themselves several months in 1915 and successfully resist the more than 10,000 Ottoman
This
Turkish.
was my topic 10 years ago in the Berlin conference.
Yes, I know.
Resistance.
Yes.
And of course, Idil or
yeah. In Hazakh.
Azakh, yes, rather,
yes.
more correct. It was the focus because they defended themselves very well. In relation to the collection of weapons, there's a document in French from the Vatican archives where it does say in 1926 Turabdin was attacked, and of course history repeats itself even in an 11 years gap, and they collected again from the villagers all the weapons they could. Even if they didn't have weapons, they told them, you need to bring us weapons even if you don't have them. It's a very illogical decree by an officer. But this continued up to 1926, which I normally in my talks, this is what I try to point out, that this continues up to 26. So it doesn't end with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, I liked how the editor, in one side, he brings the document in from an official Turkish or Ottoman perspective, and then he brings basically counter view from Assyrian side. So you can read both of sides. And this is also done on an incident that took place in Midyat in 1939. So where the editor lets a staff officer, Sami Küçük, stationed in Midyat, describe the events surrounding the military intelligence plot in Midyat, called Depo Olayı from a Turkish perspective. And of course, this narrative is taken from a book written and published by the officer himself. And again, Jan, as editor, he brings a counter view from Hori Episcopos Hori Ibrahim Hadjo, and on the events. So all over, I see that you have dealt, of course, with many issues related, let me say, to the first volumes on the Eastern reports. And you see still an opportunity to gain a new insights, I think, from the documents. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, I've used recently documents from the second volume of the Path Towards Cipher more than this. But as I was reading it for our conversation, I made quite a lot of post-it notes, because what happens is that this different perspective is, and then in your mind it starts getting some dots connected, and hopefully I'll be able to use them in the future. But more importantly, I'll be happy if many researchers out there with different perspective than us or me can also use them. And I think that's the idea. So hopefully there'll be more wide coverage now. And I think perhaps if some of them were available in English, would have been, would reach a wider audience.
Of course. So let's switch to the second pair of books, which is basically also based on documents, reports, articles translated and published, and all translated now into Turkish. Seyfo'ya giden yollar, Mezopotamya'da Doğu Batı Süryani kiliseleri arasında tarihi, politik, dini etkinlerin ürettiği iç savaş. So let me say dive a little bit into those and try to shorten, let me say, our session in a half an hour. Yeah. So
Okay. Yes.
what are your
Yes.
comments initially on this?
I translated also Abdulmejid's preface to English, and I look at his summary. But I'm pretty sure I have also written a. I have also I have a little forward, but I focused on one document on the called Jacobite Register, but I'll come to that. But I think this one goes a bit further behind
Okay.
in history, and as Abdulmejid points out that there is a lot of documents about theological debates, which is
Yes.
beyond my area of expertise, or I wouldn't say of interest, but beyond my area of expertise, because these church disputes early on are, of course, as very important for someone who looks at the church history. But to me, the most interesting parts is that and most significant in Assyrian history is the separation of the Chaldean church from the 16th century. So since then, it starts becoming more complicated nomenclature, history, and also in terms of division. On top of other fragmentation this community is experiencing, and geographical and dialectic and so forth, these divisions I think, have cost overall, and it prevented the community to be united and at least managed to fight in 1915 more than just in Idil. So quite a lot of documents are about it's a theological
Yes.
for theological nature, which is beyond my expertise. But what I translated one document called the Jacobite Register, and I think perhaps some listeners may not know, but the Assyrians, or the Jacobite Church, if not so much the Nestorian Assyrian Church of the East, the Armenians were nominally in charge, at least in the 19th century. And this was a dispute between the two communities. And I think this is perhaps John's idea of putting that title, religious and political factors that created the civil war, what he calls the civil war. And that the Jacobite Register talks the Armenian Patriarch calling the Jacobite or Yakubi Suryanis as Armenian Yakubi Suryani, which is very complicated for someone to say, well, what's Jacobite, what's Suryani, how to do with Armenia? Well, they weren't Armenians in the sense of being an ethnic group, but in terms of administration, they were supposed to go through the Armenian Patriarchate.
Yeah, but
to Savlaport.
Yeah, what I found interesting in the first volume, as you say, it has a lot of theological disputes and so on. We can maybe in a different session really talk about those issues. But yeah, there are examples about the Catholic missionaries in the region, starting from Mosul, going into Turkey, is today Turkey region, and even into Midyat. I think there are new revelations or insights provided by the various reports, statistics, and so on. The aim of the missionary, they're interesting how they see it. Also, when Twingchi, later also a Catholic, came to Mediat, commenting on Laborde's mission, that Catholic, the initial missionary in Mediat, that he states ultimately it failed, noting that what remained was the reputation of a son. The elders who knew him still talk about his life of repentance and perseverance. They document the difficulties of missionary work in the region, including conversion, influenced by Protestant missionary, the limited effectiveness of Catholic efforts, and broader social religion dynamic in Turabdin. A very, very dedicated topic for itself, for further studies, in addition, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
the work of the missionaries is, of course, is a topic in itself, and also the divisions that created, which is why we have so many Assyrian churches. So, and starting from the 16th century, the Pope, in my first book in 2012, I think, the Assyrians post-Niven, this is one issue that I tried to understand how the churches were divided, and of course the Chaldean church. And as you know, in Diyarbakir at some stage there was another patriarch. So there were a period where there were three patriarchs from basically the same people and the same liturgy. Even when they became Catholic, they got special dispensation to continue with their rituals, that's a topic in itself, but this adds to the existing literature of missionary activities in the 19th century, in late 19th century. But because of the missionaries also, we have all these reports, not only about church differences and divisions, but also about the massacres and eyewitness reports. So, and there are missionaries from Spain, there are missionaries from Italy, there were missionaries from France, and even from northern countries as well. So it's a wealth of information out there, which has only started being collected in the last 20 years, mostly through John's efforts. So this there is on page 194, there's a document called Sultana Evgü, praising the Sultan. And this is what I mentioned maybe earlier in our conversation, is that some Christian leaders praise the Sultan. And the Sultan was the one responsible for massacres against their own community. Not so politely, maybe, in a paper I've given a few months ago, I called it a dhimmi attitude. Accepting your role as a dhimmi. Being dhimmi is one thing, because you have no power, and you're a dhimmi because the central state regards you a dhimmi, or zimmi in Turkish. Dhimmi is Arabic, but in Turkish, the D usually, dhimmi, the D becomes Z in Turkish, usually from Arabic. But accepting the dhimmitude is something else. So this was the topic of my paper in June. It's something that I avoided for many years, because I know it will upset some members of the Syriani community to describe some of the patriarchs in that light. But I don't do that. The documents do that.
No, definitely. Actually, we have a couple comments and questions which I would like to forward. So Andy Daniel, they are watching us on Facebook, of course. if there is there a link to the Ottoman archives in English? He's asking. To my knowledge, there is no.
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 Unless you speak Turkish, you won't be able to do. Look, I haven't looked it up for a very long time, but without knowledge of Turkish, you won't be able to do anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then we
Unfortunately,
have,
yes, yeah.
yeah, we have from our friend Joseph Bahti. He says, "Thank you, Dr. Donef, for this interesting program. In your opinion, how accurate and professional are the transcriptions and translations of these documents?"
Well, they're very accurate because John overlooks it, and we worked together for more than 20 years, so I know his connection. The documents are not his translations, but there are people that he trusts. And some of, in this document, in this collection, I don't have any translations, but I've translated other documents. If people, the main person who transliterates is a professor of Ottoman studies. And in my experience, he's a great translator. And if he doesn't know something, I know by experience, because I asked him to translate a poem from the 16th century, because I thought that there was something there that in the end it wasn't there. But he said to me that these are not Arabic, but Persian, Farsi words in the 16th century. It's not my expertise. Can I get an outside help? I said, please, anybody, So you can see that he's a very genuine scholar, and I think the bulk of it is his work, and is very trustworthy as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So we can trust the translations.
Yeah. He asks further, when working on them, should one follow the standard Turkish orthography or for transliteration, or rely on one's own understanding of the language phonetic style as John does?
Well, I always find it difficulty in transcribing them, but I usually like putting the words in Turkish as they are, with the Turkish letters like the Ü, the umlaut, and the I rather than I. And if it's not, but for some words, I also put the English translation for the general public. But I try to use the original Turkish as much as possible. And this is why the term Syriani is one problem. How do you translate it? So if you find documents of mine, often I leave the word Syriani as it is, rather than putting Syrian, because that's how you might translate, but it confuses things. But in square brackets, I put Assyrians, or I put a footnote to explain the context. So, and each translator will have a different system, but I'd like to have the Turkish word as it is in Turkish, not phonetically.
Yeah. With regards to the title of the two second volumes, he says, Bahdi says, in my opinion, the internal conflicts would have been better than civil war in the title. What is your opinion about this title?
Yes, probably he may be right. Sorry, John. And if you notice that when I mentioned it earlier, I said internal struggle, not civil war, because probably it's a better description, but maybe John is trying to be a little agent provocateur on this. You get more attention by calling it civil war. But if you look at the period of 1915, and I'd like to also tell people about Kemal Yalçın's book on Sayfo, and there's a couple of others that are in Turkish, which hopefully both will be translated to English at some stage. I have no knowledge whether they are. I think maybe Kemal Yalçın's book on Sayfo is. And then you look at the period that Kemal Yalçın talks about, and different narratives, you'll find that there was definitely an internal struggle and disagreement, rather than a war in the sense that Lebanon had a civil war, or Greece had civil war, two parts having their own weapons, and they went at each other. Yes, but we may find new documents in the future, and it may well be a civil war rather than internal struggle. But at the moment, I'm careful, and I use the terms internal struggle. So he's right.
That's true.
Or she is right, yes.
Just maybe as a last point from my side, I think during the Turkish Republic era, we have documents also that highlight Turkish interest in what was happening under the French mandate and British mandate. So French mandate in Syria, British mandate in Iraq. With regards to Assyrians, very much close follow-up and cooperation, which also in itself deserves a special focus and discussion. Yeah.
Well, as we said, there are many themes that come out from these 4 books, which is not possible for one researcher to focus on. So
absolutely,
we and I, perhaps we have similar, I think, we've focused on similar themes. But yes, there's so much material there for different researchers to focus on, and focus on different themes. Now, in my talk a few months ago, and I just written the paper for publication, this conference was 110 years of Saifa. As you remember, we had the conference in Berlin, 100 years of Saifa. I did it over Zoom because it's a long distance. It's hard to go for a short talk somewhere. I said that looking at some of the documents and new documents is that a number of themes. One is the clergy attitude, and the second thing is the internal struggle. So the divisions within the Syrian community, because there were some became Protestants, as you know, Abdulmesih Abbas Süleyman Shaba, the Sulibas book, the Shamas Sulibas book about the Protestants, which is a new community in the 19th century, and then the Catholics. And that created divisions within the community, and they were not able to reconcile, which means that they didn't, they could have defended better themselves if they were united. And that we're talking about only the Turabdin area, not talking about Nestorians who were united and defended the best they could. So, and the third theme is here, is that some of the documents are written by the clergy. Some of the earlier documents talk about praising the Sultan, which we talked about, you know, and some of these prayers in the church, calling the Sultan to use his sword and trample upon the enemy. I find it, knowing the history now, to read that, to think, but that's what he did 10, 15 years ago to the people that asked him to show strength. This was, unfortunately, an example of dimitude. But also, many documents, when they dare to complain to Sultan or the Saplan port, Yüce Divan, they blame the Armenians for creating conflict and divisions. And also that's because there were, and you'll find a lot of documents in this, in the last 2 books, church disputes, the different churches fighting. I mean, I'm talking about building churches, not the theological aspects of monophysitism or duophysitism, or even administration, but actual fights for, and there's a document there, the Kırma, is it Kırma Church, if I'm not mistaken, Adıyaman, the gendarme was called to separate the community members, which involved Armenians, I think, and Assyrians. So there's also that theme which needs to be taken up and discussed by both Armenians and Assyrians and non-Assyrians such as myself. So there's many themes that come out for different people, and there are many documents, plenty of documents for everybody to concentrate, including Turkish researchers by ethnicity. Not only those, there are some that accept as SIFO, but others who don't. But there are so many different aspects they can. And I must say, lately, we find last 20 years, I find a lot of documents in Turkish written by Turkish researchers, and are excellent. And they are able to go to archives, which I'll never be able to. So there's a lot to summarize from my perspective is that when I started looking at this, starting from Gabriel Yonan's seminal book, now we come to a period where there's so much material for all of us to focus. And perhaps, though, what is this research for is the question. At the end, we want, or I'd like, some recognition from the Republic of Turkey that some terrible happened in 1915. You know, I'm careful not to use the word, but it's just beyond massacres of people because they were deported. It's more than that. The document shows there was systematic massacres of Christians by Etihad. So now we are 110 years later. We don't have to accept Etihad's heritage. As you know, maybe you don't. I've written a book, The Self-Righteous Muslims, or Righteous Muslims, sorry.
Yes.
In
Yes.
1915. Now, this shows Ottoman administrators, as well as ordinary Muslims, are helping the Christians. That's the tradition that I think we should be proud of helping our neighbor. So that's not exactly a positive note, but I'd like to conclude on that.
No, thank you. So in summary, I think it's not exaggerated to say that these reports published the 4 books in general, both and they are in different directions. Of course, the one is more the Eastern reports, documents from Ottoman archive. The second one is more on the church and inter-community issues. That they provide new avenues for research and give new insights. They may not change the whole view that we have so far on the events described, and the events they range from a timeline of 150 years. So we cannot summarize in couple sentences, but they will the books, I think, the reports, they will let me say improve our view and fill new gaps that we have with regards to events of the history. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes. Yes. And as you know, there's more to come. There's the Action Chaldean, which we're going to talk about. Not today, but I think is your topic, isn't it?
I will be talking tomorrow at the Nineveh Chair Conference on the journal Action Assyrio-Chaldean.
That's what I'm talking about. Yes, because those are also ready to be published in English this time. So, and those documents are also useful in understanding the Paris Peace Conference, which is an important chapter in which the Assyrians didn't gain anything, and I've written a paper on that. But it gives good background to an understanding of some of the delegates that participated in in the Paris Peace Conference. And although the book is related to l'Action Chaldean, there were also other additional
Yes.
reports in there, which is not the journal, but
Yeah.
they relate to people that participated in the Paris Peace Conference. So
Yeah, that's true.
that
There are
that would
also
be
the
ready too.
memoranda that were submitted in Paris. There are a couple of them also reprinted, of course. I mean, some of the materials have been treated in academic papers. You have yourself written and presented on some issues related, of course, to Paris. What I disliked in some of our internal assessments on Paris is that let me say the fact that Assyrian did not succeed with their demands is simply in a simplified way. It's always blamed on the name issue, and I think this is not true. When you look into the documents, the Armenians were much, much stronger. The Kurdish people were much, much stronger and powerful during that time. And even they did not get anything out of Paris. So to blame the Assyrians just on the name issue, I think it's too simplistic. That's my conclusion on the issue.
That probably could be one factor in it, but there were other issues, of course.
Yes.
There's definitely
yeah.
some discussion about the nomenclature they were always present, but
yeah,
it's not just that. And there were also delegates who came from the United States.
absolutely.
Because they were living there and they spoke languages and, and Lady Sugma couldn't attend, if I remember correctly. So there were many other administrative issues. Yes. So that issue is a discussion in itself, and they can be connected to the l'Action Chaldean journal. And the name itself, I think if we finish in about 2 minutes, was an effort to unite. I mean, today the term Assyro-Chaldean is not liked by anybody. I know that by experience. It's not one that has got wide coverage, but I think the members wanted to find an umbrella term to unite and perhaps melt the divisions by coming up by.
We can dive into that when the book will be published. I think it's a broad topic. In fact, there was in Istanbul a council and united all Syriac family churches, Syriac-Chaldean, Syriac-catholic, Syriac-orthodox, and they established even a common council in Istanbul during that time. So there were efforts of unity in Turkey, and they agreed over there on the Assyrio-Chaldean name. And of course, the US had a little bit different view on the issue. But I would like to give you the opportunity to maybe summarize and conclude in order to close our session. We are now 1 hour 30. So if you don't have a question here from inside, I would like then to conclude. Adnan?
No more questions. I wrote to you the questions.
Okay, thank you. So, Racho, it's your turn.
Well, I don't have any. I thought I concluded, but if you want me to say, the first two is both Armenians and Assyrians, and the first two books. I mean, in fact, if you say there's two sets of two, but the second one is also Armenians and Assyrians, and I think you'll find that reading all four, looking at difference, it's very hard for us to separate them because they live together in many places, although there are Assyrian and Armenian villages separately, but because of the administrating, because of the monophysite nature of religion, and because of the struggles for churches and positions between patriarchs, it's very hard to separate this. It spoke different languages, but when we research on Assyrians, and we're also researching on on Armenians, I think, and we have to bear that in mind, that it's we can't isolate, because in the first two reports we also talked about Kurds. So, so when we talk about Assyrians, we also talk about other ethnic groups. And one that is nearly forgotten is the Yazidis. The Yazidis in 1915 actually had tried to help Assyrians, and Yazidis were also massacred. And I tried to remind people that we should also focus the best we can, not that many documents perhaps, on Yazidis, but there are some documents which I translated to Greek, I think, where an Ottoman document saying that the Yazidis are helping Christians. So perhaps other than Kurds, Armenians, and Assyrians, maybe some researcher may also look to that aspect of the events. Not that many documents, but there are some. And if there are, John will find them.
Okay. Thank you very much,
My
Dr.
pleasure.
Racho Donef, for taking the time for this session, and I hope we will have the opportunity to talk again on other books of Jan Bet-Sawoce, edited by him, and also on other Assyrian-related topics. Again,
Jano is also here. Jano is watching.
Have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If